All right, you guys. So today we're going to talk about the events that led up to the American Revolution. We're going to talk about the French and Indian War today. Who knows who fought in the French and Indian War? Jasmine?
The British?
The British. Who else? Jaden?
The French and the Native Americans?
The French and the Native Americans, yes. So we are going to start by doing a vocabulary that's going to kind of introduce the topic to you guys. And we're going to have a little fun with it. We're going to stand up and stay in our static families. We're going to stand up and push in our chairs. And while the vocabulary music is playing, you guys can do like your favorite dance move from PE or just your favorite dance move in general, okay? All right, you guys. Once you guys are quiet, I'll start the vocabulary.
Everyone's trying to rise, ain't got no time to hide. Everyone's trying to rise, ain't got no time to hide. Everyone's trying to rise, ain't got no time to hide. Everyone's trying to rise, ain't got no time to hide.
I love it.
The British came looking for settlement, but the indigenous was already here living. They are the Native Americans. The French and British started fighting over land that they were swiping. The natives fought for both sides, and the British called on their colonies.
Emma Claire has some good moves.
They were willing to go to war, blood, sweat, and tears. The British have been years, the natives were here. British people here, they colonized the land, took resources and wealth, and didn't want to share. Wanted it to themselves. France claimed some other land already. In the north and in the west, they had territory. They always traded with the natives of the first from their bodies, making them French. If anything started racing, Ohio River Valley, both the French and the British wanted it. French and natives were happy till British came interrupting it.
Jasmine has some good moves.
Natives got tired of calling their land like they discovered it. Didn't want to hear none of it. Already had 13 colonies. They wanted more, so they told the French that they gotta leave. The French told them that they were being placed and smith. So the British declared war 1756. Everyone's trying to rise, ain't got no time to hide. Natives been divided before colonists arrived. The indigenous tribes fought in that thing. So some sided with Britain while others sided with France. Everyone teamed up with the British. The Huron and other tribes teamed up with the French. Things were getting ballistic. They had common interest. The resources were riches, so they were willing to go to war. War started, the French were in demand. In charge, we with indigenous tribes formed a dominant squad. Used their war tactics like blood for blood. Defeated Britain for 2 years. Beaten like arms. But the war wasn't over. In 1758, Britain regained hope. The Secretary of State said lots of money to soldiers. Got native support from the Iroquois. It was over. Started attacking and capturing all the French force. They couldn't force the natives and the French lost. French surrendered and the British gained control. But spent so much on the war. Now they were in the hole. So much debt that they couldn't afford. The land started taxing the citizens that won the war for them. Now known as Americans, was tired of being used, so they fought back the American Revolution. Everyone's trying to rise, they got no time to hide. Natives been divided before colonists arrived. Different indigenous tribes fought in that biz. So some sided with Britain while others sided with France. And Iroquois teamed up with the British. The Huron and other tribes teamed up with the French. And things were getting ballistic. They had common interest. The resources and riches, so they were willing to go to war.
All right, you guys. I hope that you had fun with that and got to move your bodies around a little bit. We are going talk about the French and Indian War. So we went ahead and passed out a passage on it that we're going to read together, as well as a graphic organizer that we're going to fill out together. I know that you guys told me that the French, the Native Americans, and the British all fought in the French and Indian War. But what were they fighting for?
Land.
Jasmine?
Freedom. I mean, no. Wait, what was the question again?
What were they fighting for in the French and Indian War? Do we know?
They were fighting. Can I take? No.
Bailey, you want to help her?
Land?
Land. Yes. So they were fighting over land. And we're going to talk about why they wanted this land that they were fighting over. Why the British wanted the land, why the French and the Native Americans wanted the land as well, okay? So while I read this, keep that question in mind and be thinking about why they wanted this land, okay? As the colonies grew, settlers began to dream of moving across the Appalachian Mountains and into the Ohio Valley, the region between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. The French had also dreamed of moving past the Mississippi River in these lands also. British settlers wanted to farm the rich soil there, and the French wanted to trap beavers and trade the furs. So why did the British want to settle here, Emma Claire?
Because it was rich soil.
Yes, they wanted the rich soil. And why did the French want to settle here? Carmen?
They wanted to trap beavers and trade furs.
Yes, good job. So we're going to go ahead and underline that in our passage. We're going to underline British settlers wanted to farm the rich soil there, and the French wanted to trap beavers and trade the furs.
Is there a certain color you have to use?
No, you can use your pencil. Great Britain and France could not agree about which country should control these lands. Both Britain and France claimed this area. In 1754, the French made good on their claims by building a fort where the city of Pittsburgh stands today. This is called Fort Duquesne. News of the fort alarmed the governor of Virginia. He ordered a small force of Virginia militia to drive the French out of the Ohio Valley. Militias are small armies of citizens who are trained to fight in an emergency. To head the militia, the governor chose a 22-year-old volunteer named George Washington. Who is George Washington? What do we know him as? Jacob.
The father of our country.
Okay. Savannah?
Mm-hmm. He was our first president.
He was the first president of the United States. So what this is telling us is that before the United States was even a thing, before there was even presidents, George Washington was put into a leader position, right? Jaden?
He was the commander of chief.
He was. He was. And so this says how he got started, okay? Washington's whistling bullets were the first shot in a conflict known as the French and Indian War. This war was part of a long struggle between France and Britain for territory and power. The Native Americans of the region sided with the French. The French and the Native Americans had traded furs for years, and the Native Americans disliked the British because of how they treated the Native Americans. The Native Americans also wanted to protect their lands so they could grow crops and hunt in the woods for both meat and furs. So whose side did the Native Americans take? Landon?
The French side.
They took the side of the French. And who can tell me why they took side with the French? and not British? Taylor?
Because they traded first with them.
Yes, they had a relationship. They traded with them. What was another reason why they sided with the French and not Britain? Maddie?
And it says the Native Americans disliked. Wait, that was the same thing. Oh, they wanted.
You're right.
Americans also wanted to protect their land so they could grow their crops and hunt in the woods for both meats and birds.
Yes, and what was the sentence before that you said?
Oh. The Native Americans disliked the British because of how they treated the Native Americans.
Yes. So let's go ahead and we're going to underline those parts in that passage as well. So we're going to underline from the Native Americans of the region sided with the French. The French and the Native Americans had traded furs for years, and the Native Americans disliked the British because of how they treated the Native Americans. The Native Americans also wanted to protect their land so they could grow their crops and hunt in the woods. So then it says, the British Army's march into Ohio Valley was a disaster. The troops' bright red uniforms made them the perfect targets for French sharpshooters and Indian allies. 2/3 of their soldiers were killed. So this is kind of like something we can relate to your guys' life. When you're out hunting, you don't wear usually something that's gonna like make you stick out. You're usually like in camouflage, right? So you can like blend in. So they used bright red coats and it made them an easy target at the time. Jaden.
Is a sharpshooter a sniper?
It could be, yeah. Another name for that. And it's important to remember that back in this time, they didn't have like hospitals on site or things that could like help aid these people right away. Medicine was very short, like they had to find it. There was not a lot of it. There was a huge shortage of medicine. And they learned a lot from that at this time. And now in wars, we have specific military people that are medics and are there to help heal the wounded. Yes. Washington himself narrowly escaped death. I had 4 bullets through my coat and 2 horses shot under me, he wrote in his journal. Showing great courage, Washington led the survivors back to Virginia. There he was greeted a hero. The French and Indian War raged for 7 long years. The turning point came in 1759 when British troops captured Canada. In 1763, Britain and France signed a peace treaty ending the war. In this treaty, France ceded, which means surrenders, or gave Canada to Great Britain. So how long did this war last? Landon. 7 years. Later down the road, you may hear the 7 Years' War. What they're talking about is the French and Indian War. Just like another name for it. Some people get confused because the French and Indian War did technically start in 1754 and ended in 1763, which would be 9 years, but the actual conflict didn't start until 2 years later in 1756, making it 7 years. Okay? The actual battle. Yes. So we are going to go ahead and watch a brain pop and another really short video on the French and Indian War to kind of give you guys some more background on it. We'll start with this one since it's not a song. No. I know that was fun, but.
Oh, it's the Liberty.
1750s, the British and French were claiming more and more land in the New World. The British had the 13 American colonies, but they also wanted the Ohio River Valley. The valley had rich and productive farmland. Many British had come to America specifically to farm. The French, on the other hand, wanted full access to the Ohio River Valley for their fur trade. They had trapped animals for their fur pelts for many years in Canada, but felt they should be able to claim land in America for France. To make a solid claim to the land, the French began to build a string of forts. The English sent a letter to the French by way of a young messenger, 21-year-old George Washington. The letter stated that the French claim was wrong and told them to leave. The French responded by capturing an English fort. This is what started the war. The French had a good relationship with the local Native American Indians. The Indians joined in the fight against the British. This is why the war was called the French and Indian War. The British had the advantage in the war because of their number of troops and militia, volunteer American soldiers. After many battles in 1763, the Treaty of Paris was signed and the war ended, with Britain the winner. The French lost any land they had once claimed in Canada and the Ohio River Valley.
Alright, you guys, and now we're going to go ahead and watch a brain pop on it. Let me get that up real quick.
Oh, that's James Wolfe. He was a British general who got killed during the French and Indian War. Okay. Dear Tim and Moby, please tell me about the French and Indian War. From Bobby. The French and Indian War was a conflict between France and Great Britain over territory in North America. It lasted from 1754 to 1763. Actually, American Indian nations fought on both sides, but we'll get to that in a minute. By the middle of the 18th century, the 13 British colonies were thriving. The land to the west was controlled by France, and they'd claimed most of Canada, too. Most of New France was relatively unsettled by the French. Fewer than 100,000 colonists lived there, and their economy revolved around trade with native peoples. Well, the borders between the French and the British territories were sort of vague. A lot of land had been claimed by both countries, including the Ohio River Valley. Sparks started flying when British fur traders moved into the region. The French wanted to control all the trade in what they considered their territory. And the British were undercutting their prices, offering the same goods at a lower cost. So the French warned their native trading partners to stop dealing with the British and began building military forts to keep the English out, including Fort Duquesne, built in 1754 at the intersection of three key rivers to cut off British expansion. That spurred the governor of Virginia to send in soldiers to kick out the French. They were led by a young colonel named George Washington. Washington and his men ambushed French forces at the Battle of Jumonville Glen, but they were eventually forced to surrender and head back to Virginia. The battle turned a territorial dispute into an open conflict. After this, the leaders of France and Britain started sending troops and supplies to North America. And that's how the French and Indian War began. Well, at the start, most native nations sided with France. The French tended to treat them with more dignity and respect. They viewed the nations as trading partners, not enemies. And unlike Britain, France didn't build farms and towns on native land. The Brits had some native allies, the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, a powerful six-nation alliance to the east. Still, the British weren't very good at fighting on the uneven terrain and were constantly forced into retreat. But by 1758, things began to change. Back in England, a politician named William Pitt took over the planning for the war. He sent thousands of additional soldiers to capture the biggest French settlements in Canada. He increased popular support for the war in Great Britain and the American colonies. And he attacked French territories around the world, expanding the conflict into Europe and Asia. Yep, the French and British were fighting battles as far away as India, but the major action was still based in North America. The British Navy blockaded the Atlantic coast, preventing French ships from getting through. Soon, France couldn't reinforce its armies with new soldiers or supplies. Over the next 2 years, the British won victory after victory. The biggest came in 1759, when General James Wolfe captured the Canadian city of Quebec. Right, that's the scene from the painting. The next year, the British took Montreal, and the French surrendered for good. 3 years later, the two sides signed the Treaty of Paris. France had to give up virtually all of its North American territory. Britain took control of all land east of the Mississippi, and all of Canada, too. But that's not the end of the story. The war had left Britain deep in debt, so they started taxing the American colonists to pay it off. With no representation in England's government, the colonists weren't too thrilled about these new taxes. In fact, the issue sparked a revolution. Right, that's the one. Hey, speaking of which, can you change this painting back? I think we should go.
All right, you guys. So now that we watched those videos and we went over the passage, we're going to get out our graphic organizers and our art bags. If your colored pencils aren't sharpened, go ahead and use a crayon so you don't have to sharpen it. Jaden?
You know, all of the land they gained from the French and Indian War, why didn't they let the colonies go there and just not make new colonies?
We're going to talk about it. So how long did we say that this French and Indian War lasted?
7 years. 7 years.
7 years. And what were they fighting over? Land. And who can tell me what that land was called that they were fighting over? What was the name of the land that was called? Landon? The what? Not the Mississippi River, but it does have something to do with Ohio. Jaden?
It was a lot of east of the Mississippi River and
The Ohio River Valley. So we're going to go ahead on here and we're going to put underneath the French and Indian War, we're just going to put fought over the Ohio River Valley. So you guys can refer to that if you forget what that land was called. You'll know. And we're also going to put that this was a war that lasted 7 years. Make sure you guys write small so it'll fit in there. So now we're going to talk about the territories that were already claimed. Who owned the 13 colonies at this time? Carmen? England. Who? And what's another word for England?
British.
The British, yes. So we're going to go ahead and color the 13 colonies red. Do you guys remember what a map key is?
Yeah.
Okay, well we don't have one on here, so we're gonna make our own, okay? So after I'm done coloring this, I'm gonna make a little box of the same color, and then I'm gonna label that the British colony. And who can tell me who owned the land that was from the Mississippi River to the left? So like all this area in here. Who owned that land at the time, Baylor? Uh-huh, the French. So this was the French's territory that they already claimed and owned. No, we're going to talk about Florida right now. So we're also going to put a little blue box down here in our little key, and we're going to label that the French claim. So I heard someone ask about Florida. Who can tell me who owned the land that was in Florida at this time? Who can remember? We talked about this in a different lesson. Jaden?
Wasn't it Spain?
It was, yes. So Florida, we're going to color purple, and then we're going to put that in our key under the Spanish territory. And were they included in this war?
No.
No, they weren't. We're just going to color in this so we know that that was their territory and they didn't have anything to do with the war at this time. So we're going to label that as Spanish. And then we're going to color in the land that goes through the Ohio River as yellow, and that's all the disputed land. So that's all the land that the French and Native Americans and Britain were fighting over. So it's a large piece of land, huh? So you can see why they all wanted that to expand their colony.
Isn't that Louisiana? No, the blue is Louisiana. Oh, like in the corner. I see.
All right, so then we're going to label this in our key as the disputed land. So I'm going to draw a little yellow box. We'll put disputed. area. So that kind of gives you guys like a visual of what land that they already had and the land that they were trying to fight for. Jaden.
Why was Florida so long back then?
Why was it what?
It's so long. Yeah,
It still looks like that today.
Yeah, but it's not as long. It's like so long. But like I mean, this part of it is like cut off from Mississippi. That over there is cut off.
Well, I know that over time after the American Revolution and everything, the states looked different. So on this side that we have right here, whose flag is that? Do we know? Jasmine?
British.
Yes. So we're going to put British underneath. And we're going to color in the flags after we put all the information on our graphic organizers, okay? So who can remind me why the British wanted this land, the Ohio River Valley? Savannah.
So they could trade first with the no.
Why Britain wanted. Anna Claire, you want to help her?
I don't think that's a guy, but was it like a rich or was that?
So if you guys don't remember, go ahead and look back to our passage that we read together. Maddie, why did the British want this land?
British settlers wanted to farm the rich soil there.
Yes, so they wanted this land to grow, and so they could use it to grow their crops and farm on the rich soil. So we're going to put British wanted the Ohio River Valley to expand the 13 colonies and to farm the fertile soil. So if that's Britain's flag, whose flag is this?
French.
The French. So go ahead and write French underneath and underline that too, please. And who can tell me why the French wanted this land? Why were they in this fight for this land? Savannah.
To trap beavers and trade their furs.
Yes, so they wanted to get this land to expand their colony and trap and trade the furs. So we're going to write exactly that. The French wanted the Ohio River Valley to expand its colony and to trap and trade furs. Landon?
Canada's eastern desert was Louisiana's, like the French controlled it because one, their symbols of war relieved, and that's the Louisiana's.
That is funny. That's a good observation, Landon. Okay, so now that we know why the British and the French were fighting this war, why did the Native Americans get involved? Why did they want to fight for this land? Jasmine.
Because it had fertile soil and it was good for farming.
They wanted to keep growing their crops, and what else made them want to fight in this war, Caleb?
They were fighting on their land, and they didn't want to just sit there like ducks.
Okay. Yeah, they wanted to keep their land. So why did they join the French? Jackson?
Because they've been trading with each other.
They wanted to keep trading with them. What's another reason why they joined the French? Jaden.
Because they disliked the British because they built on their land and they treated the Native Americans disrespectfully.
Yes, good job. So we're going to write down there that the Native Americans wanted to keep their lands, to grow crops, and trap furs. And we're also going to put what Jaden said, that the Native Americans joined the French because they did not like the way that the British were treating them. All right, so I know I told you that I would let you guys color in the maps, the flags next to the map. And the symbol, what is that symbol called again, Landon? Yes, so we're going to color those yellow. Sorry. Can you see it all there?
Is the last word British?
Yes, yes, it is. So we're going to color those yellow on the flag. And then the background of the French flag is, it's blue. So we're going to go ahead and color that blue. And then the British flag had red in it. So the cross in the middle of the flag was red. And then it also had blue in all of the little triangles. So we're going to leave the rest of it white after we color in the blue triangles. Right. Once you are done coloring your flags and writing all the information down, go ahead and glue in your graphic organizers to your social studies learning log. And also put your passage in your social studies pocket. Then, once you have that glued in, you guys can get out your Chromebook and you can go ahead and go to your Google Classroom, and there's going to be like an early finisher activity in there that you guys can do. It's like a simulation sort of thing. It's like a timeline that you guys will be able to create on your own and drag the, you'll drag the events that led up to the Revolution, the Revolution War. You'll see information on there about the French and Indian War, and you guys can see how they went together. What came first, what went last, okay?
Are those other ones supposed to be white?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Jaden?
You want to know something funny? I used to think A, Florida Lee was from Florida.
Oh, fun.